Last year, I got paid over $500 an hour to edit a 6-second commercial. But getting to this point in my career was way harder than it should have been, and I wish I'd known how to do it smarter from the start. So to help you raise your editing rates faster than I did, I'm going to show you the exact process I'd follow if I had to start over today. But first, I need to show you what happens when you don't follow these steps. So after my freshman year of film school, I landed a job as an assistant editor on an independent feature documentary, and the pay was $1,200 a month flat. And of course, I don't have my exact time logs from over 20 years ago, but I was in the office every day, oftentimes working 10 to 12 hours a day. So doing the simple math, I was making right around $5 an hour, which was less than minimum wage at the time. So what am I doing differently today that allows me to book a project at 100 times that rate? Well, imagine your editing rate is a bar on this graph, and each of these lines on the left is a ceiling you have to break through in order to raise your editing rate. So I'm going to show you what each of those income ceilings are and how to break through them so you can raise your rate too, just like my student Rob, who booked a higher paying editing client only halfway through my program. Let me show you the first income ceiling that editors start to push up against. So when I was making $5 an hour assistant editing an indie documentary, what were the tasks I was doing? Well, I was logging and capturing hundreds of hours of footage. And this was over 20 years ago, so it was all shot on tape. And each tape had to be carefully logged, notated, and captured, ingested onto the hard drives for editing. Now compare that to my recent job where I was making 100 times more. For the 6-second commercial, the creative brief was to cut down a 30-second commercial that already existed. But I had to maintain the story, the emotional impact, and the messaging at a fraction of the length. So it was really an exercise in emotional storytelling. That's the key difference here. The $5 an hour job was purely technical, and the $500 an hour job was about emotional storytelling. If you're being paid for your technical skills alone, your rates hit a ceiling fast. And if you want to raise those rates, you need to practice and prioritize emotional storytelling in your editing. So step one to raising your rates is to focus on emotional storytelling. And if you'd like to work directly with me on your emotional storytelling while cutting high-end spec commercials for your show reel, click the link in the description to check out my editing program. But if you don't do this next step, you could be a great storyteller and still hit another income ceiling fast. Now let's talk about the project I was working on when I was making $5 an hour. It was an independent feature documentary film, and independent films, especially documentaries, are known for their limited budgets, and this project was no exception. It was actually a small miracle that the position of assistant editor was paid at all. So let's compare that to the current project where I was making 100 times more. This new project was a broadcast TV commercial, and in the world of broadcast, budgets go something like this. There's a client, and they hire an ad agency for a large sum of money, usually, to create a campaign. Then the agency hires a production company to produce the campaign, and then the ad agency also spends a large sum of money on media slots in order to play the ad. And this process is not cheap, as you could imagine, with bigger projects costing millions and millions of dollars. So here's the difference. When I was getting paid $5 an hour, I was working in a niche where getting paid $5 an hour was actually on the high end. Many people work for free on independent films. But in the commercial world, when I was making $500 an hour on a project, that's not even the high end. Some post-production facilities would have charged many times that per hour for the same task. Here's a quick graphic illustrating what those lower income niches look like. At the bottom is social media. I'd put independent film right in there with that. So step two to raising your editing rate is to move to a niche that supports higher pay. But even if you get into a higher paying niche, there's another income ceiling that could be holding you back. When I was brought on as the assistant editor for this feature documentary, I was being paid a fixed monthly rate, very similar to an employee. Now, there are a couple of benefits to being paid like an employee. First, your pay is consistent, so you know how much you're going to make every month. And two, if your employer doesn't bring in enough revenue, they're still obligated to pay you, so they are carrying all of that risk. But there are also some major downsides. Let's say the company employing you brings in a huge new client, and that client pays them tens of thousands of dollars per video, and they turn around and pay you hundreds of dollars per video. So basically, you're not participating in the profit, and your income is capped no matter how well your employer does. Now, I'm a freelance editor, which is basically a one-person business. So I'm taking on all the downside risk, like maybe I have a week where very little income comes in. But I also get all the upside reward when a job is very profitable. And that's exactly what happened on this particular job. So step 3 to raising your editing rates is to become a freelancer or your own business. And if you want my personal guidance on becoming a freelance editor or raising your rate as a freelance editor, click the link in the description to check out my editing program. But there's still a trap that freelance editors fall in that keeps their income capped. What happened to me when I was making $5 an hour is what happens to so many editors, and it might be happening to you too. You sign up to work for a flat project rate and you end up spending way more time on it than expected, or way more is asked of you than you originally expected. So with each additional hour you put in, your effective hourly rate keeps going lower and lower and lower, causing tons of frustration. This is one of the worst positions to be in as a working editor. And one step up from this would be to charge hourly, because the main benefit of charging hourly is that you know you'll be paid for all of your time. But there are two major downsides to charging hourly. One, clients prefer to know the cost up front, and that's pretty much impossible to do with an hourly rate. And two, there is a conflict of interest because you're actually rewarded for going slower and being inefficient. Now, there's a third way, which is what I did on the job where I made $500 an hour, and this is where I hope you can get to as well. You charge a flat project rate, which clients like, but you clearly define the scope of work up front so you know and they know exactly what's expected. So for this job, I knew how long a 6-second commercial cut down typically takes me. So I put together a bid based on that. So the flat rate I came up with for this project included several rounds of revisions at every step of the process, which is typical for an ad agency edit. But it just so happened that on this project, my client loved what I did on my first pass and had no notes. And unlike with an hourly rate, I was rewarded for my efficiency. So instead of spending 16 hours on a $2,000 project, I spent less than 4, which is where the $500 an hour figure comes from. And the client was ecstatic because they loved what I did, I solved their creative problem, and I delivered ahead of schedule. It was totally a win-win. So step 4 is move to project rates with a clearly defined scope of work. But even if you charge flat project rates with a clearly defined scope, there's still a ceiling you'll bump up against. So I'm 41 years old, and when I think back to how I was at 19, it actually kind of makes sense that I was only making $5 an hour. I was like your normal college kid. I would show up late, I was moody, I always thought I was right, I would make mistakes, my communication was poor. So in reality, when it comes to all the intangibles, I probably was worth around $5 an hour. And the director hired me because 1, I was willing to do the work, and 2, I was willing to do it at a very low pay rate. Now, luckily, I had some great mentors soon after that helped me grow up in a lot of areas. So I learned to communicate clearly and often. I learned to show up on time. I learned to meet deadlines. I learned to quality control my work so it rarely had mistakes. And maybe most importantly, I developed a positive attitude that people tend to like being around. You'd be surprised what these intangibles can add to your rate, especially in the context of a high-pressure broadcast TV job. The producers that hire me, they know I'll get the job done from a creative and technical standpoint, but what they appreciate even more is that I do so in a way that's friendly, clear, and lacks drama. Now, figuring this out for yourself takes a level of self-awareness that can be really challenging to attain. So I'd recommend having a mentor you trust to call you out and help you grow. So step 5 in raising your editing rates is to work on the intangibles: communication, dependability, and a positive attitude. And if you'd like my personal help breaking through these income ceilings, it's exactly what I teach in my editing program. Click the link in the description to learn more. Now you know the 5 steps to drastically raise your effective hourly rate, but it won't help you if you don't know the 12 lessons I learned from being paid $40,000 to edit just 4 minutes of content. So watch this video next to learn what those 12 lessons are so you can apply them and level up your career faster than I did. Happy editing.